It's a stretch to say that Mazi Smith is the key for the Cowboys to have a successful season, but not by much. We'll tell you why next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we're taking a look at the interior defensive line for the Dallas Cowboys going into training camp. And just off the top, Landon, this is probably the one position that I feel maybe the worst about going into camp. And one of the main reasons why is the depth, but also this is a huge year for Mazi Smith. The Cowboys are counting on Mazi Smith to take a massive step forward here in year 3.
I mean, it's a lot of unknown. I mean, that's why, we keep saying, I think people ask about grades. They always want to talk about grades and all that. But I think we keep giving an incomplete grade, right? Because it feels like even with Mazi Smith, this is really kind of the first year that he's, been healthy and, had a good year of tape to build on to kind of get into the offseason. This is really a make or break year for him, who's at the top of this depth chart. And I think is going to dictate a lot of how well this team is going to play on defense. Because I think you know what you've got in Osa Odighizuwa, but I think directly tied to the play of Mazi Smith is the inability of the Cowboys to stop the run. And I think if he's able to kind of step up and be that difference maker as a run defender, I think a lot of things kind of fall into place very nicely.
Yeah, and we talked about this when we were talking about like Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe, where if you just tell me how one player performs, I can probably tell you how the entire offense performed, right? If Guyton has a bad year, I have a hard time seeing the Cowboys being really good on offense. The same for Mazi Smith. If Mazi Smith has a down 2025 and he's just not playing up to the level that we even saw maybe at times last year, I just don't know if they've got the linebackers and the other guys on the defensive line to help out. But on the other side, Landon, if he turns into a first-round caliber player and he's playing the best football of his career, now I think we're having a different conversation about the defense entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, at times you saw a guy who was improving, who was getting better as the snaps are going on. It was hard to see because the football was really bad. But I think that he's not the only part of this defensive line room that that's going to get snaps that's incomplete. I feel like the other part of this is that the Cowboys are probably missing another defensive tackle, another nose tackle to come in. And we can talk about those guys a little bit later. But I think that's the other part about this that really kind of feels incomplete is that I think what you have in Osa Odighizuwa. Well, let's talk about Solomon Thomas, who I think is a key acquisition. But I think on the other side, at the nose tackle side, you're still not sure what you're getting out of Mazi Smith, and you're probably still going to have another body to kind of get in there and rotate with him.
What does Mazi need to do this year to take that next step? Because I do think we saw flashes last year of him just being stronger and making plays in the backfield. We know that he's not going to be a pass rusher, but how does he become a more consistent and dependable player?
I think consistently, getting off the ball correctly, I think that was an issue very early on in his career that I think he's continued to get better at. But I think that it still continues to kind of be an issue at times is that it's gotten from a bad situation to an inconsistent situation, which is, an improvement, but we still needed to go from inconsistent to, hey, maybe just every once in a while, he's the last guy off the ball, or, I'm saying we needed to go take another step in consistently appropriately getting off the ball. And I'm not asking him to beat Parsons or Osa off the ball and get in and get the sack. I'm asking him to get off the ball in a timely manner so that he can get into proper position to use the strength that we know he has in his body. Because I think that's really been the issue, is that a lot of times you don't get to see how strong he is, because at the point of contact, at the time that the guards and centers are engaging him, he's in such bad body position because of the snap timing that he's getting blown off the ball at times.
All right, let's talk about Osa Odighizuwa, who the Cowboys paid a ton of money this offseason. And honestly, we were kind of surprised that they gave him an extension, not because we didn't want them to, just because we knew what the number was going to be. And it's a lot for a guy that we think has gotten better every single season, but it's not been a Pro Bowler yet. I think you and I are in agreement here. I don't want to speak for you that Osa's best football is still ahead of him, but how does he take that next step from an above average defensive tackle to a game changing defensive tackle?
I mean, again, it's just like a lot of players on this defense just continue to be a better run defender. I think you've seen a guy, again, that grew up in the kind of Dan Quinn style, that was a one technique, not a one technique, but one gapper, who's getting up the field, who's worried about rushing the passer. And we've seen him, continue to be near the top of the league in pressures for interior defensive players. And I think that aspect, he's shown you that he is a very good player as a pass rusher. I think where he needs to grow is to continue to be a versatile player and try to grow into being a better run defender, because I think the problem that this team has had is that they've got, Micah Parsons and Osa Odighizuwa, who are great at pass rushing, but they need them to be better run defenders so that they could stay on the field and not feel like this team's getting bullied up front and getting run all over and losing their own opportunities to be pass rushers because they're such, poor run defenders.
Yeah, and I think for Osa, we saw last year he finished number one, I believe, among all defensive tackles in QB hits, fourth in pass rush win rate. And those stats are just, they show you the consistency game in and game out. And I think I'm someone that believes sacks are overrated. They can be kind of noisy, but it would be nice to see him convert some more of those QB hits into sacks, because you convert 4 more, you go from 6 sacks to 10 sacks, and we're just having a much different conversation. That he's not really any different of a player. He's just converting a couple more little plays here and there. I don't think he's that far away. I think the switch from from Dan Quinn to Mike Zimmer to Matt Eberflus is actually going to help him, because I think he's going to be able to just get up the field more. You're probably not going to see as many blitzes in Matt Eberflus's defense, which I would assume you're going to drop more guys into coverage, giving Osa a little bit more time to get to the quarterback. I expect a career year.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think if he does those two things that we just kind of prescribed, takes a step as a run defender, converts those pressures into sacks, you're talking about a guy who I think is likely to make a Pro Bowl.
Yeah, I think I'm really excited. He's one of these young players of the team that we talked about for a couple weeks now. Like, if the Cowboys are going to go to the postseason and win, they need some of these other guys to step up outside of, Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott. Osa's already a good player, but can he take that step from good to great? We'll see. I'm very, very optimistic. All right, Leigh, let's talk about the backup defensive tackles on this roster that have actually played some snaps in the NFL. And that's like one guy, and that's kind of the problem here. Let's talk about Solomon Thomas next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. We absolutely love Gametime here on Locked On Cowboys, because there's been plenty of times where I've wanted to go to a baseball game, but it's been kind of later in the day. But I want to be in the stands because, the Pirates have got a pretty good pitcher. But that's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without all of the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you could splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. And Gametime makes it all possible. Gametime makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually go down the closer that you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a low price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are discussing the Cowboys defensive tackles heading into training camp. And let's get to the key backups. And it's really just Solomon Thomas here. Like, that's the only guy that they have right now that you can count on.
It was funny that I was wondering why you put an S at the end of that, because you're right. It is just Solomon Thomas at this point. And as we kind of alluded to earlier, it does feel like this team is still one player away from, their heavy rotational defensive tackles, 4 that they would use. I think that there's likely that they'll have a 5th guy in there, but I think that potentially would be Toa, or maybe let's see how King Basode shows up, but we'll talk about those guys later. But yeah, Solomon Thomas right now is the only guy kind of coming in there as a consistent under tackle. And it, when he got signed, I actually thought that they might have used him a little bit more as an inside outside guy, but I think now looking at the sheer volume of defensive ends that they have outside of Thomas, I certainly can't imagine that. Now, I will add in that I wouldn't be shocked if we saw like a Peyton Turner or some of these guys,
Marshall Nealon play a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Reduce in a little bit more. But again, that is going to be in the more kind of 3 technique role, which you already have Solomon Thomas for. So that doesn't really help you with needing another potential big body in the middle. So we'll talk about that more of that in a second. But Solomon Thomas, I think, is a guy that, if he's coming in as your backup under tackle, he's fitting in very nicely into the role that he's been provided. I don't think he's necessarily a guy that you're thrilled about having as your starter at 3 technique, but
no.
He's got a lot of skins on the wall. He's played a lot of football. He's played inside and out. He's a big, strong, tough guy. Man, the pictures of him make him look like he's Lou Ferrigno from the original, of the Incredible Hulk. And he's just a really good guy and an interesting, funny guy. But yeah, I think he comes in and he gives you a lot of stability in the backup spot. I think he's going to be reliable. He's going to do the job correctly. He's got experience with this defensive line coach. And I think all those things, at least give you another body that you can rely on. So you're not feeling like you're overworking. You're already kind of undersized, overworked, under tackle that you just signed to a lot of money. So if anything, it should help keep a guy like Osa Odighizuwa really fresh.
Yeah, I saw some pictures of Solomon Thomas working out at Cowboys OTAs, and my first thought were, it's going to suck for those first 6 games that we're going to miss because of a PED.
Yeah, no kidding.
I mean, honestly, but you can tell that he's trying to put on some weight to become a full-time defensive tackle. And I'm just going to assume it's going to be as Osa Odighizuwa's primary backup. And that fits his game, right? Like, he is not a run defender. Throughout his entire career, he's always graded out really poorly as a run defender, but he's a average-ish pass rusher, right? And that's fine. Like, that's all you need for your backup 3 technique. That's what the Cowboys were hoping for when they signed him to a vet minimum contract this offseason. So I think he's going to be able to fill that role really well. He played with Aaron Whitecotton with the Jets. The teammates like him. My biggest concern is if Mazi Smith goes down with a tweaked ankle for 2 weeks, I honestly don't know who is going to be your backup nose tackle. They don't have one on the roster.
No, I mean, again, like, I think clearly the roster is incomplete, and they're still missing at least one more guy that they need to kind of either step up from the ranks of players that we'll talk about in the next segment, or from the free agent ranks where the Cowboys need, or potential trade, just a guy that's on another team that isn't a free agent yet, somebody that's not on the Cowboys. I think is likely to be that 4th, heavy rotational defensive tackle, specifically another big body nose tackle. So we'll see how that plays out, and maybe someone like Jay Toya totally surprises us and is able to take that role maybe a little bit early. But I still anticipate there's going to be at least another veteran free agent or trade coming in for the Cowboys this year.
And maybe they just feel like the way they did last year, like, hey, we know we need these guys, but they're going to be available later in August because shockingly, 340-pound defensive tackles don't want to go out and practice, every single day. Linval Joseph, they went out last year and they got Jordan Phillips. I think, was it late August, early September?
Phillips both are currently available, right?
The Phillips trade didn't work out, but I think that's the kind of move they're going to make probably after preseason game 1 or 2.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like both of those guys are available, and more of these guys that you've been like, oh yeah, I know that guy. He plays, 15 snaps a game on first downs, for a good run defense. I'll take that guy. Or maybe there's a dearth at the end of it as we get close to cut down time. You can flip a late round pick for a guy that you feel good about. So yeah, I think there's plenty of time still for that type of defensive tackle.
Now, there is one more veteran on this team that we should at least mention before we get to the young guys, and that is Perion Winfrey. Now, he's also pretty young. Like, he's not played a lot of football. I think he's 24, 25 years old, but he's the only other defensive tackle on this roster that's like played an actual snap in the NFL. Winfrey is coming from the UFL. He's a former 4th round pick by the Browns, played at Oklahoma, incredibly long and athletic. But he's another guy I think projects as an under tackle, that 3 technique. And my guess is he's fighting to be, maybe he's fighting with Solomon Thomas for that backup job, but more realistically, he's fighting for just a spot on the roster.
Yeah, more likely for a practice squad, and hopefully to make a rotational, a guy that doesn't get a jersey each week, but it's on the roster. I think that's a healthy expectation for him. But I think any kind of snaps in a game, I don't think is something that he's likely to see.
Yeah, and again, he's an athlete. He's a pass rusher. He's not really the most technically sound run defender. Where he's at his best when he's slanting and getting up the field. So he's just somebody to keep an eye on during preseason and training camp. And honestly, we looked at the interior offensive linemen for the Cowboys last week, Landon, and they've got some really good backup interior guys between Brock Hoffman, Robert Jones, TJ Bass. So like Winfrey, if he's able to produce against those type of players in practice, maybe he will be able to make this roster.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. The Cowboys have a lot of depth at the offensive line. Maybe they can help iron sharpens iron that situation so the younger defensive tackles improve quickly.
All right, let's talk about some of the rookie defensive tackles for the Cowboys and what our expectations are for them this season. We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Landon, let's talk about some of the young defensive tackles that might be able to save the Cowboys. And let's start with Jay Toia, who the Cowboys got from UCLA. He was a 7th round pick. Again, 7th round picks have a hard time of making the roster.
Yeah.
But the Cowboys have had some success with defensive tackles named Jay in the 7th round before.
They have, yeah. This is a very different type of player than Jay Ratliff, but yes, an interesting comparison there because, look, I think this is a situation where you felt like that he was a higher ranked player than where he got drafted. And you're hoping that he can come in and show you a little bit of what you saw on the UCLA tape in the NFL, but you just never know how these guys project. But I think, his game kind of is the kind of game you need for that sort of backup nose tackle position. I think he could probably even give you some snaps at 3 technique on early downs if you wanted him to. Eventually, the hope at this point is just to try to get on the field in some form of capacity. I think he has the talent to kind of potentially be one of those guys who surprises us at a training camp and then vaults himself into a backup role or a guy that's taking more snaps than we anticipate. But you never know, and I think a 7th round pick is obviously a gamble. Even if you feel like he was a 4th round grade, I think even a 4th round defensive tackle rookie, it's also a dice roll. So you have it's one thing to have good feelings about this guy, and I think we all do. And I'm excited about his future. I'm excited the Cowboys are drafting guys like this again. But I don't know that it's. I would pump the brakes a little bit about having super big expectations for him early, especially early in the 2025 season.
And for both of these guys that we're going to talk about, Jay Toia and
a King Basote.
A King Basote. We'll get it by the season.
Yeah.
You're just hoping that they can make the roster. Like, that's a huge win if either of these guys can make the roster. I think Toia has got a better chance to make it because the position he plays is just a lot less crowded, because the only name on the depth chart right now ahead of him is Mazi Smith, whereas someone like King Basote, who is a pass rusher athlete, he's got to compete with Solomon Thomas and Perion Winfrey and maybe Marshawn Nealon and some of these other guys in the roster. I think Joe Toya, I think it would be a little bit of an upset if he doesn't make the 53.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he does make the 53. I think they probably end up taking 5 defensive tackles. What do you think? Like on the game day roster, probably, or on the 53.
Well, that's a good
rather.
question. So you've got Osa and Mazi, Solomon Thomas. That's 3, and then probably 2 more. Probably another veteran, and then one of these other guys, whether it's Winfrey, King Basote, Toya. Yeah, probably 5.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that's probably what a good solid goal is for Toya. He probably has the inside track on that 5th defensive tackle, and then you're just kind of got to pencil a name in eventually for that number 2 nose tackle. So, yeah, that's a good goal for him this year.
All right, let's talk about King Basote. See, we're getting it. It's only taking us a little bit.
That's right.
This is an incredibly athletic, long pass rusher who still needs a lot of development. To me, he seems like the perfect type of player to stash on a practice squad or 2. 7th round picks a lot of times will make it to the practice squad. A lot of teams have defensive linemen they like, but I wouldn't be surprised in a year or 2 years if this isn't somebody who is competing for some, rotational snaps. There's a lot to like. He's just not ready yet to play.
Yeah, he's just a little bit raw, and I think honestly, like him and Winfrey are kind of on similar tracks. If maybe King Basote might be like a year or 2 behind, right? Even though Winfrey's been around a little bit longer, it's these guys kind of, it's not linear with these guys' development, and especially with the way that these guys' careers go. So, but yeah, I think you can see a guy like King Basote kind of putting in a lot of hard work, and then pressing for a roster spot next year. Or pressing for competing to be a guy that makes you consider not re-signing Solomon Thomas, or as a guy is potentially another backup 3 technique that you like, you just want to see more of potentially. So, yeah, with defensive tackles, the development is a little bit slower.
Yeah. So how do you feel about this position overall? Because I got to be honest, this is the one spot that it's crazy. If they were to sign one more starting caliber nose tackle, or even just bring back Linval Joseph and tell me Linval Joseph is going to play 18 snaps a game, I would feel so much better about this team, and I'm sure they will. But as we stand right here in early July, I just don't love the depth at all, and it makes me feel really uneasy.
Yeah, I mean, I get that sense, right? Like, I'm not nervous about it because in my mind, just assuming that that's the plan and that's what they're doing. But you're right. Like, it hasn't been executed yet. So without those names kind of on the depth chart, we all understand that they're not playing football in July, obviously. But I think
they are playing preseason games in July. We'll say that this year. It's
okay.
different.
But I think I think what you don't really worry about the position until you start getting closer to the middle of training camp, and I still think that there's several different windows of opportunity for getting these guys, and clearly they're at a spot right now where they've got the guys that they want to evaluate in their camp, right? Anybody that they're going to get from here on out is going to be established in one way or another, either as a very low but very high, a very low ceiling but very high floor 34-year-old nose tackle, or in a trade situation for a solid guy that is just being pushed out because there's maybe younger, better players on the roster that is, drafted a couple defensive tackles. So I think that there's plenty of opportunities left, but yeah, without a name kind of to say or to mention as the part of this heavy rotation, that combined with the unknown with Mazi is a lot to take on as a fan at such kind of a pivotal position for your defense.
And honestly, I think I felt better about the defensive tackle spot last year because I felt better about the defensive ends and their ability to stop the run, because you had DeMarcus Lawrence, who now obviously this is all preseason training camp thoughts, but you had DeMarcus Lawrence, you had Chauncey Golston, you drafted Marshawn Nealon. You thought, okay, yes, maybe they're a little bit weaker at defensive tackle, but they've got these bigger body defensive ends. They've got one of the best run stopping defensive ends in Lawrence. They'll be able to cobble it together and make it work. And then we saw in the first half of the season, they couldn't make it work. Now, injuries played a big part of that, but I guess that's my fears. Are we just going to get into the season and be like, okay, why didn't they do more to address this position in March and April rather than waiting till July and August to figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that at a certain end of the, I think if you rewind back to a time before free agency, before, the draft, you look at the list of needs for what the Cowboys had. If you could only hit 8 out of the 9, right? I understand why they left big body run stuffing nose tackle as the last one, as the one to get on the way out the door to the season, right? But you're right. Like that doesn't mean that the plans worked. It doesn't mean that it's executed correctly. There's still a lot of unknown left. I think they're playing the odds correctly, but they still have to execute it. They still have to get the right guy in here, and without knowing that name, without knowing who that is, it's hard to know the fit. And it's such a high leverage thing, the run defense getting better and improving the defense that it's enough to kind of keep you up at night about who the backup nose tackle is.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Check out tomorrow's show when we're going to look at the defensive ends on this roster, including Micah Parsons. I'm counting him as an edge rusher because that's what he does.
Yep,
we'll talk about Donovan Ezeriki. We'll talk about Dante Fowler coming back, so make sure you guys tune in for that. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here on Tuesday.